Oh boy, this one will hurt a little. Because I can see what the developers were trying to do here, and while they did a few things quite well, some others that are essential for a great game, they fell flat hardcore. Since the story is straightforward and sadly doesn't have much to it, let's jump right in. You choose one of these 5 heroes and each hero has its own class. I will get to the classes later. Whichever hero you have chosen gets a short introduction since he or she is a so-called Seeker, which means he or she is super magic awesome, and the game then starts. You arrive at Toldred, a town assaulted by zombie-like creatures, I guess. There you meet Efren, who was fighting those zombies by himself, but now, since you are here, you help him out. From then on, both of you will travel around throughout the continent of Estera, trying to find the so-called Tears to stop this zombie infestation and save the world. Well, this is the core story, and yeah, sure, it might not be a bad story per se, but it's painfully cliché and way too safe, which is kind of disappointing. However, there is another reason why I am disappointed with the story, and it mainly comes down to the actual characters. So, your main character is one of these 5 heroes, and for my first playthrough, I have chosen Draina. And no, it's not because of her underboob action, since I only noticed it about 1 hour in. Honestly, along the way you will travel around with other characters. Some will join automatically, like the remaining 4 heroes that you can choose in the beginning, which makes you having a choice at all almost useless, while others will only join if you talk to them. If you've ever played the awesome Suikoden series and consider the recruiting aspect, then Tears of Avia might remind you of that. In itself, this was an actual good idea by including this recruiting system, which is why the tavern is only reserved for you and your team. But seriously, not even a bartender? I mean, really? But this could lead to very interesting interactions between certain characters, especially the main ones, but there is very little of it, mainly because none of them are actually all that interesting. I won't say that it all boils down to sugar spice and everything nice between the characters, but there isn't any real meat there to make them interesting. For example, towards the end, Efren gets influenced by the villain of the game called Villainkind, and this could have gone somewhere, especially because Efren actually seems to have a decent reason for suddenly fighting back. But ultimately it's just an excuse to have someone in the group manipulated and for them to fight and nothing else. Or another one is when Reina starts questioning her comrades at some point in the game, which leads to an argument between some in the group. But again, it was a one and done, way too short and essentially irrelevant. It's moments like these that could have made this game way better than it is, but in the end it all falls flat because nothing really went anywhere. If you go to the tavern, you can also interact with some characters, or open in public, you can witness some small talk, but even that is just the bare bones stuff. Because none of them tell anything interesting at all. The only actual interesting character was the villain himself, Villainkind, or whatever. He is a manipulator, he speaks in a very calm manner, a very villainy manner. You actually love to hate this dude. Sure, he is not the most memorable villain ever, far from it, but in comparison to everybody else in the game, he is by far the best character. You see, I am disappointed because the developers could have done so much with the story and the characters because both had a lot of potential. like making the characters more interesting, better dialogues, especially in the tavern, or go all out in the examples I've mentioned with Ethan or Reina. But hey, the visuals are quite nice. The characters have a nice design to them, the environments are also quite fun, and the final stage looks really interesting. It's a shame you can't really explore anything though. The only parts you can somewhat explore are very few towns where you can buy and sell stuff, visit the tavern or a chapel, which is... I really fail to understand the point of the chapel. In some towns, there might be a library to visit where you can find some more information about the world of Estera, or there might be barracks, but ultimately the town feels empty. Sure, there are people all around, but I mean, look at them. They all look like mannequins, they barely move or don't move at all. Often you can't even go through them and you can't interact with any of them. Unless it's a character you can recruit later on. This is mainly why the towns feel empty. It's almost like a ghost town that has puppets standing around to make the appearance that it's alive. Or in other words, it's a fake town. And no, there are no secrets. No items to find, nothing. Of course, this is a low-budget game, however, look at how full the city Tirig is. Tirig doesn't need to be this full if you can't interact with anybody. Why was this necessary? Reducing the population and add at least a few more animations would actually make this town less lifeless. Because the town itself actually looks quite fine, but it's the emptiness of it that leads to the question of why? During the battles, the animations are quite good actually. Sure, some look like flash animations or something. Well, they might be flash animations, I don't know. But overall, they look good. But since we are in the battles, let's dive deeper here. So this is a strategy RPG. If you don't like that, this game is not for you. I prefer turn-based JRPGs, but I don't mind playing some other sub-genre like strategy RPGs, action RPGs or something like that. So this means that during your turn you can move your characters like chess pieces. Well, strategy RPGs tend to have some chess-like aspects to them anyway. Since each character belongs to a certain class, they will have different strengths and weaknesses. The classes are Ranger, Warrior, Mage, Brawler, and Priest, and each character belongs to one of those classes. A Mage uses black magic, a Priest is good for healing and buffing, etc. Each class, each character, and each attack have a different range. You can make a move and then use an ability or attack. Or you attack first and then move, that's up to you. So all of this adds a lot to the strategies you can use to defeat your enemies like a good strategy game. Or so it would be if not for one almost fatal flaw. Because the fatal flaw is the difficulty. Here's the thing. You can choose the difficulty in the beginning of the game, and even in the hard difficulty, the game is rather easy. Because the enemies never get really difficult or anything. Heck, once you've boosted yourself up a little, just a little, most attacks will one-shot enemies down even towards the end of the game. No joke. The enemies will have more HP as you go on, sure, but ultimately that won't matter. The only challenge here might come from the amount of enemies that are on the field, because after a while the maps get really packed. But again, for the most part you can one-shot everyone with most attacks to the point where it will not really matter how many enemies there are. Of course, if one of your characters dies in the hard difficulty, they will be gone for good, which could have added to the challenge, but unfortunately, since you can one-shot almost everybody, you will rarely die. The bosses are the only ones that offer a challenge, as they should, since they can kill you easily. But then again, even they have obvious weak points and patterns, so it won't matter in the end. Similar to the issue with the mannequins in Tiddick I've mentioned earlier, if they reduced the amount of enemies but increased their difficulty by making them smarter, or at least reduce the damage you can do and not one-shot enemies left and right, then Tears of Avia would have been a better game. But hey, the music is quite nice. The opening is a bit weird though, because half of the song is in English while the other half is in Japanese. I mean, many Japanese songs, well, at least if you listen to Japanese music, they have English sections in them, or they have a lot of English words, and that's quite normal. I mean, Gem Project does it, Galnerius does it, which by the way is a fucking awesome band, L'Arc-en-Ciel, Move, Sold Out, whatever. Well, sure, examples like As One from L'Arc-en-Ciel. 1/4 of that song is Japanese, the beginning, while the rest is in English. But cases like in Tears of Avia are still kinda weird, or at least I find it weird, that half Japanese, half English thing. I don't know. But, well, the singer doesn't seem to be Japanese, so maybe that's the reason why half of it is English and half is Japanese? I don't know. But hey, it sounds nice regardless. During each mission you have 3 objectives you can try to accomplish, which adds a bit more meat to the game, but ultimately this also falls flat because they do very little. Well, okay, I will admit that I haven't completed every single challenge, but I did at least half of them, so unless you unlock something from completing 100% of those, then there is almost no point to them. Only almost though, because, well, I will get to that in a few seconds. The game actually crashed on me quite a few times, which was also infuriating. Another big misstep is the fact that you have this world, but 90% of it is just going from one battle to another. This would be fine, however, these battles seem just like busy work, because it feels like you are just going through the world and these points without real purpose. Finally, and there's the reason why I almost forgot about this, you level up your characters and they learn your abilities through this ability tree that is divided in 3 columns. This would actually be a nice idea if it were implemented better. First of all, in general, you level up way too fast. This is a bad sign because it seems that the developers were afraid to make the game too grindy. Well, yeah, sure, some RPGs can be too grindy, no doubts about that, but going the opposite direction by making it not grindy at all, it's just as bad. Because you getting stronger doesn't feel rewarding in any way. Heck, you can even power level any character if that character was the single one that killed every enemy on the field. Second, this ability tree allows you to have access to very powerful attacks. And yes, most of them are too powerful. It gets worse when you will have learned the whole tree by level 32. Have I mentioned that you level up way too fast? Can you see the issue here? You can also equip your characters with a weapon and 3 rings per character. Buying these are the only somewhat grindy parts in the game because money isn't that easy to come by. But then again, you receive equipment after each battle, so no need for money at all. I assume that the most stars you get, the better the awarded equipment you receive, which I really didn't notice. But even the standard stuff is more than enough to allow you to power through everybody. And okay, you need money to buy identity scrolls because some weapons and rings have to be identified first, which is also a nice idea. But those scrolls are really cheap, and so you won't really have a reason to buy weapons at all. Sure, some vendors, or at least one per city, will have powerful weapons, but again, considering how easy the game is, there is no real reason to buy those. But, well, there are a few more minor issues I could nitpick, but I will stop it here. I find it very disappointing that Tears of Avia isn't going all out here because it clearly had the potential to do so quite easily. I mean, it has some nice ideas, it sounds good, has Japanese voiceover only despite the developers being from England, and the game looks quite nice. But ultimately the game suffers because of the many rather annoying issues it has. Because the developers, instead of using a single idea or a single system and make it the best it can be, they introduced many systems, didn't perfect any of them, and as a result you get a game where you as a player ask, oh, what could have been?